Ned Caro had worked the graveyard shift at Harwell Private Medical Center for 17 years and counted himself a man who could read a room in 3 seconds flat. He could tell you which after-hours visitor was genuinely sick and which one had simply panicked, which consultant was going to snap at the night nurse and which one would bring biscuits, and exactly how long a patient's family could hold their composure before someone started crying in the corridor outside room 4. He had, in 17 years, been surprised exactly twice. The third time happened on a Tuesday in March, and it started, like most things that mattered, very quietly. He was pushing his trolley past the dispensary at 11:20 when he heard the main entry doors bang open at the far end of the ground floor. Not the normal push, the bang of men moving fast and not caring who they woke. 3 of them came down the corridor, 2 supporting a third between them. The man in the middle was tall and broad, with the kind of shoulders that suggested he had never in his life needed anyone's help with anything. He needed it now. His face was gray under the fluorescent light, and he was working hard at keeping his expression still, which told Ned the pain was serious, because men like that only worked at their faces when the alternative was worse. Ned stepped aside. He did not ask questions. In 17 years he had learned that the men who came in at 11:20 did not want questions, they wanted to be shown where to go. He pointed them toward the dispensary window and went to find the duty coordinator. What he found, instead, was chaos of the quiet institutional kind. The on-call physician, Dr. Harmond, a capable man and normally reliable, had been called to a multi-vehicle accident on the ring road 40 minutes earlier and would not be back for hours. The second on-call had already signed out on a family emergency. The duty coordinator, a woman named Brisk who deserved her name, had spent 10 minutes on the phone and reached nothing but voicemails and after-hours exchanges. She looked at Ned the way people look when they are running out of walls. He went back to the dispensary. The woman behind the dispensary counter was named Selah Vane, and in 17 years Ned had spoken to her roughly as often as he'd spoken to the fire extinguisher in the east stairwell. Not because she was unfriendly, she had a composure about her that might have read as cold but was, he suspected, simply the look of a person who concentrated. She ran the night dispensary alone, 4 nights a week, had done so for 12 years, and she was always there when he pushed his trolley past at 11:20, at 2, and at 4:30, dispensing prescriptions, cross-checking charts, and doing whatever the third thing was that pharmacists did that nobody else understood. She was already at the window when the 3 men arrived. Ned, hovering at a cautious distance, watched her take one look at the men between his 2 companions and say, without alarm, "Bring him through." The door beside the dispensary window opened. The 3 men went in. Ned stood in the corridor and told himself it was none of his business. Then he stood there a while longer. Inside, Selah Vane did not panic. Ned knew this because the door had a small wired glass panel, and panic had a sound and a posture he recognized, and what he could see through the glass was simply a woman moving with the particular economy of someone who has done a version of this before, not in authority, exactly, but in competence. She had the men seated on the treatment stool. She had taken his pulse at the wrist and at the neck with 2 fingers and a watch she kept on the counter for the purpose, not her own wrist, so she could see the second hand clearly. She had asked him something in a low voice and received an answer that made her nod once, as though filing the information away. She had asked a second question, and a third. None of them were the kind of questions that invited alarm, they were the kind that gathered facts. One of the 2 companions, a broad-faced man with close-cropped silver hair, had started to say something about getting a private doctor, a name, someone would come, and Selah had looked at him briefly and said, "That is the right idea. Do you have a number?" The broad-faced man had stepped into the corridor to make a call and come back shaking his head. 2 more calls. 2 more headshakes. Selah had nodded as though this confirmed something she had already accounted for, and turned back to her patient. What she did next, Ned would piece together only afterward, because most of it took place on the other side of the window. She worked within what was hers to work with. She had 12 years of reading charts, of cross-checking interactions and contraindications, of sitting in on the unofficial late-night consultations that happened at the dispensary window when doctors were tired and pharmacists were handy and discretion was the order of things. She had also spent her own time, methodically and without announcement, studying what was just beyond the boundary of her authority, not to trespass it, but to understand where it ended and why. She stabilized what could be stabilized. She managed what could be managed without exceeding her standing. And when she had done that, she sat down at her desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small address book, paper, not a phone, and found the number of Dr. Orrin Fass. Ned only knew this because, at midnight, a spare, white-haired man in a wool overcoat walked in through the main entrance carrying a brown leather bag, nodded at the coordinator as though he had been expected, and went straight to the dispensary without being directed. Ned found out later that Dr. Fass had been retired for 3 years and had no current admitting privileges at Harwell, and that this had been explained to him on the phone, and that he had said, more or less, that Selah Vane did not call him at midnight unless it mattered, and that he was coming. He was there for 2 hours and 18 minutes. Ned checked his watch twice, the way you do when you are waiting for something to resolve and cannot help keeping count. Selah stayed beside the doctor the entire time. From the corridor, through the wired glass, Ned watched the shape of it, the older man working, the younger woman handing, checking, reading aloud from a chart she had assembled in the preceding hour and a half from the notes she had taken at the window and the records she had pulled from the system. She asked one precise question at what looked like a critical juncture. Ned could see the doctor's hands stop and his head turn, and even muffled by the door he could hear the beat of quiet before the answer came. It was not the question of someone guessing. It was the question of someone who already knew what the answer needed to be and was verifying. At 2:45, Dr. Fass emerged, buttoning his coat. He did not look at Ned. He stopped at the coordinator's desk, left a note that Ned assumed was for the record, and walked back out into the night the way he had come. Inside the dispensary, the man with the gray face was no longer gray. At 4:05, Selah Vane came to the dispensary window, where the broad-faced silver-haired man had been sitting in the corridor on a plastic chair for 4 hours with the stillness of someone accustomed to waiting without showing it. She slid a printed invoice through the gap. The man looked at it. He looked at it again. He turned it over. "This is the dispensary fee," he said. "Yes," said Selah. He looked at the invoice a third time, as though it might change. "That's the standard overnight rate." "It is," said Selah. "The physician's time is his own. He will not invoice." The silver-haired man stared at her for a moment in a way that Ned, still watching from his trolley, did not entirely understand. Then he folded the invoice twice, put it in his inside pocket, and said, "We will be in touch." Selah Vane went back to her dispensary. It was 4 in the morning, and she had a prescription backlog to clear before 6. Ned pushed his trolley the rest of the way down the corridor and felt, for the first time in a considerable while, that he had witnessed something he did not have a word for. He came back the next afternoon. Ned was on a day shift to cover a colleague's absence and was at the end of the east corridor when the doors opened and the men from last night walked in. He walked differently now, straighter, slower, like a person who had chosen his pace rather than had it forced on him. He had 2 men with him, not the 3 of the night before, and both of them hung back at a signal that was barely a movement of the wrist. He went to the dispensary window alone. Selah was behind the counter. She looked up, registered him with the same filing away nod she had given his pulse at midnight, and said, "How are you feeling?" "Better," he said. There was a quality to the word that was not casual, it was considered, as though it was important to him to answer accurately. "Good," she said, and turned back to the prescription she was checking. He stood at the window and seemed, briefly, uncertain what to do with that. Ned suspected it was not a feeling he was accustomed to. "I want to know," the man said, "what you risked." Selah set down the prescription. She looked at him steadily. "I stayed within my standing." "That is a careful answer." "It is an accurate one." The man was quiet for a moment. "Dr. Fass has no current privileges here. His presence on the record puts questions against the night. Dr. Fass came as a private individual to advise a colleague in a difficult situation," Selah said. "He was not the treating physician on record. I was not acting as one. The record is clean." She paused. "I understand what I was doing. I thought about it before I did it." The man looked at her for a long moment. "You thought about the risk to your license." "I thought about what the outcome would be if I did nothing and what it would be if I acted carefully," she said. The second outcome was better. He was still watching her with the particular attention of someone not used to being surprised and currently surprised. "You want nothing for this." "I submitted an invoice. The standard dispensary rate." It was accurate. He put both hands on the counter, not a gesture of pressure, simply a placement, as though he were steadying himself for something. I employ a medical officer for the estate. The position comes with a suite, a salary, and complete authority over medical decisions for the household and staff. I would like to offer it to you." Sela was quiet for a moment. Not hesitant, considering. "I run a night dispensary," she said. "People come here at midnight with prescriptions and nowhere else to go. I expect that's needed somewhere too." He absorbed this. "Yes," he said. "Then, you won't come?" "No," she said. "But thank you." He nodded once, slowly, in the way of a person filing that away too. Then he said, "May I come here?" Sela looked at him. "To the dispensary?" "To check in," he said. "As an ordinary person would." Without, he made a small gesture toward the two men at the end of the corridor. Something shifted in Sela's expression then. Not a smile, exactly, but the quality around her eyes changed, and Ned, watching from his place at the far end of the corridor, recognized it as the look that crossed a person's face when a thing that had been held at a careful distance was suddenly allowed to be ordinary. "If you have a prescription, I'm open until 6, she said. The man's expression did not change in any way that Ned could have pointed to and named. And yet something in it did. "I'll find one," he said. He left. His two men fell in beside him. The doors closed, and the corridor went quiet again in the way hospital corridors do late in the day, not empty, exactly, but returned to their ordinary rhythm, the squeak of a trolley wheel, the distant murmur from the nurse's station, the soft percussion of the place resuming. Ned stood at the end of the east corridor for a moment longer than he needed to, trolley in hand, and thought about the 17 years and the 3 surprises and the small wired glass window through which he had watched an unremarkable woman in a dispensary coat hold the night together with her hands and her plain professional sense while every other door in the building was closed. He had not known her name, really known it, until last night. He thought he might remember it for the rest of his working life. It was Sela. It meant nothing to him and everything, all at once, in the way that names sometimes do when you finally understand who they belong to. He pushed his trolley on.